I'm going to go back to that first deal that they struck with Universal. It was in the early '90s, and Wendy Day, who we mentioned earlier, was sort of like a go-between who helped, really get them, kind of set up properly with this deal. But they negotiated it, and they just, they wouldn't take anything less than something that they felt was an incredible deal. And I remember the story that Slim told me. Was they went in, they sat down. Some mid-level executive at Universal lowballed them to straight up buy half the company.
All right, today's episode is all about the one, the only Cash Money Records. I got the one and only Zack O'Malley Greenberg here, who has reported on this company many times before. We ranked this company and the business moves they did in our top 10 revolutionary list last year. So, Zack, welcome back. I'm excited for this one.
Always great to be here with you, Dan.
Yeah, so for the folks listening, we are going to do this in a few ways. We got a bunch of categories here that we're going to run through, just evaluating Cash Money as a business, some of the highs, some of the lows, and just where they stand overall. But I think it would be great to kick it off with the question that we often hear from folks: is Cash Money the greatest hip-hop record label of all time? What's your point?
Oh, man. I think it's sort of like any of these greatest ever. Are you talking about overall body of work, or sort of like, the label at its peak? But, I think you got to take it in an overall body of work, type of thing. It's hard to top Def Jam, I think, if you were going to go with an overall body of work, hip hop legacy. But, I don't know. Other than that, I mean, it's hard to say that there's anybody who you'd put above Cash Money, I'd say, especially something that is, really artist founded in that same way. I mean, you could talk about Bad Boy, you could talk about Rockefeller. But I think that, Cash Money's had staying power, through Drake and Nicki and Lil Wayne and so forth, in a way that, I would argue that a lot of these other labels haven't. And, who else can say that they've had Drake for that long? And I guess he's not there anymore. But, man, that was pretty recent development, and it's been a pretty great run. So, to go all the way from the early 90s, through basically now, being relevant, stacking up all that catalog, it's certainly, if not number one, it's, got to be top three, if not top two.
Yeah, so my answer is Def Jam as well, and we'll get to Def Jam in a minute, but the case for Cash Money is this, and I know a few people have said it. Irv Gotti recently said it. Russell Simmons himself said that Cash Money was the greatest hip-hop company that has come through, but the case for Cash Money, you mentioned it earlier, the fact that they did it while owning the core asset in the music and still doing that moving forward says a lot. Not something that can be said about Def Jam and many of the others that would be even in the conversation. I think even a newer label like Quality Control, they've still done it while owning it. Well, at least up to this point from some rumors that are happening. But I think that's one case for Def Jam. But then I think the continued run of success from everything that happens in the 90s from, I guess we could start with like Juvenile dropping Ha in 98, and then pretty much everything from Drake's last Cash Money album, which I believe was Scorpion. So if you're looking just at like that run from everything there, that is such a strong hit rate. And I think that's the thing too that I would give them over Def Jam is the hit rate of who are the artists we signed and what was their likelihood of success. And they were just able to do it even with the imprints. I mean, I think major record labels are so wrought with so many imprints that just never worked out. And for them to have, whether it's Young Money or even the smaller moments with We the Best music or with Rich Gang, there was always something there. And even though there was some conflict, and we'll get to that, I think that's the Cash Money case. The Def Jam case, though, I think this is where I think, of course, Def Jam did end up becoming a major record label, so it's a little bit nuanced there. But I do think you have that 80s run, Beasties, LL, Public Enemy. You got the 90s run with all those artists too, especially looking at what Redman, Method Man, DMX. I feel like they had New York on lock, and then 2000s, the Rockefeller Partnership, the Murder Inc., the video games. I mean, I know the last decade hasn't been there, but it would be tough to not put Def Jam up top. But I understand if some people would consider Def Jam a major as opposed to, an independent. So I get the nuance there.
Right. And being, fully owned by a major as opposed to Cash Money, which merely has distribution agreement, and you could look at, I guess Def Jam was sold in chunks, but the total amount that it was sold for, and you'd have to adjust for inflation and stuff. But I wonder how that would stack up against the current value of Cash Money today, which, is incredibly driven by the copyrights that they still control. And, definitely hundreds of millions of dollars. If you look at Lil Wayne kind of quietly sold his half of the Young Money, Cash Money partnership for $100 million a couple of years ago. That was before the catalog boom got really crazy and then kind of died down again. So, that's valuing what Birdman and Slim own, just on the Young Money, Cash Money side of the business, at nine figures. So there's a lot more to the company than that, although that's kind of the gold mine. But still, you got to think that, this is still a $1 business. And, I'd be curious to see what a proper valuation, what it would look like against the total value that Def Jam got, in terms of dollars over the years. But, when you think about who was hottest at what record label was hottest at any particular point, I mean, yeah, I think probably the peak was there was that year that Def Jam was, getting sold, or the second half of it was getting sold, and Lior basically said to Jay and DMX, like, let's have 2 albums this year, and because the valuation is going to be based on revenues, not earnings, and like the more you can sell, the more we get. And so that moment at DMX at his peak, and Jay, I think I'd say at least at his commercial record sales peak, as an individual artist, that was about as hot as it could ever get for any record label, I think. But
that's a good point. So I guess if we were to compare Def Jam's 98 and 99, like that run, to Cash Money, and I know there's a few runs you could put in there, but from an overall commercial perspective, it would have to be 08, 09, 2010, I would probably assume, because you get Carter 3, and then you get, Drake's debut, Nicki's debut. I feel like it would probably be somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's probably pretty close. I mean, that was a lot, that was a lot of concentration within a couple of year period as well. And I think the other thing about Cash Money that maybe people sleep on to some extent is, just like the efficiency of the label, especially in the early days. And, of course we can get into some of the issues with paying producers and so forth, but they really had a system, and it was going and finding artists that were bubbling up, at first in the New Orleans area. I mean, this is in the 90s, and and then kind of just plugging them into the machine, right? Put them with the stable of producers in house, get Manny Fresh on there, and it was not like a high expense kind of situation, like maybe you would have seen with Def Jam, or some of the New York and LA labels. It was just like, it was really like, probably low cost, high output, like there's a high margin business, low overhead, it's lean and mean. So I think in that regard, Cash Money, it might have been the best business, out of any record label, right? In terms of sort of like efficiency and profitability and stuff like that.
That's a great point, because if you look at that vibe, I think that was the vibe for the South overall. We saw that with No Limit as well, just with in-house production, cheap. That production does almost everything, and the music videos aren't flashy. And the fact that I think they stuck with what they knew and what they worked with well, and eventually I think collaborations came, but that was something that they were hesitant about as well. Just thinking about Juvenile dropping 400 Degrees, and I'm going back to that just because that's the first album that comes after that 1998 Universal deal, which we'll talk about soon. But that album, I'm pretty sure the entire production value for those music videos probably costs less than one of the suits that Puffy and Mace wore in the music videos, or Jay-Z's Sunshine music video, which I know has been talked about for years on end. But that's what the vibe was. There were no Hype Williams music videos coming through Cash Money, right, at least at that point. I know they came later when Wayne blew up further, but that's what they did. They stuck to what they did, and it worked. It worked so well.
Warren Buffett would love Cash Money.
Oh yeah, he loves low cost cash
value investor, right? Early Cash Money would be the Warren Buffett play. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. And the thing is too, you talked about it earlier, just some of the things leading up to the big deal that they had, but even back in those early days, even before the Universal deal, Birdman and Slim, the co-founders of Cash Money Records, had a history of legal issues with artists and not paying artists on time. And I actually have a list here, and it's probably an incomplete list, but artists that have had some type of dispute or issue with Cash Money Records when it comes to payments. So I have Lil Wayne, Pharrell, Clips, David Banner, Bangladesh, the producer, at least 5 or 6 artists before 1998, Wendy Day, who's not a artist, but one of the attorneys and people that helped make this deal happen, BG, Turk, Juvenile, Jazz Prince, of course, Drake himself, Tyga, Manny Fresh, and I'm sure I'm missing people from that list.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a long and storied list of people to have disputes with, and it really is it is something that goes hand in hand with the success. You can't ignore that history. So I think it is important to remember some of the context. These guys were coming out of a completely different world, and they were hustlers. They were legit hustlers in New Orleans. In doing some reporting, I verified it. I mean, they were the real deal. They moved things over. They went legit. They became record moguls, and in Birdman's case, became a rapper himself. And they were not people who had dealt with sets of books, right? There was not really necessarily like bookkeeping apparatus in their former business. So, I think there was an adjustment period that, let's say perhaps went on for too long in terms of, getting things papered up and straightened out. But I wrote a big story on them in 2019 for Forbes, where I went down to Miami and spent some time with Birdman and Slim. I talked to their lawyers a lot. I talked to Wendy Day. I spent some time in the studio with them. And, everybody, of course, has, if you ask people in the Cash Money camp, they're going to have their side of the story. If you ask whoever they're having the dispute with, they're going to have their side of the story too. Obviously when there's smoke, there's fire, and there's a hell of a lot of smoke when it comes to not getting paid on time. But
what would you say is the Cash Money side of the story, though?
The Cash Money side is this. They, started out as people who had not had a formal training in business, doing business with a lot of other people who had not had formal training in business, who were represented by people who had not had formal training in business. And so when you go back to some of these early documents, it was not properly papered over on either side. And so there's a lot of question over, who owns what. I don't know that anybody who was involved in some of those early deals really, had a full grasp of sort of, music copyright and publishing and master recordings and all that. I mean, it's not like an intuitive business. It's like, wait, what? There's 2 rights to every song. That like there's a publishing and a recording. Is it separate? How does that work? So I think a lot of that was, kind of like if you go back to the 90s and early 90s, especially when they're getting started, before the Universal deal, there was just really like, I would imagine a lot of handshake deals, a lot of just, kind of like, let's see how it goes sort of stuff. A lot of, here, we're going to give you a bag of cash, and you give us this beat, or you give us a verse or whatever. So, it makes sense to me that it might not be papered up properly, but the fact that that's continued, so far into the future, that's another story. So, what they did say was that, after, and we could talk more about this Universal deal, but after the Universal deal started, and then as it continued to evolve, to where Universal got an even bigger cut of the distribution fee, or like an even bigger distribution fee than it had signed up for in the beginning. Universal took on more and more of sort of the back office function, and so some of the more recent stuff is a little bit more papered up properly. So that's the Cash Money side. But it's funny. I mean, when I did the story and I reached out to all these folks, what I got was like a no comment, which says to me that things have been settled up and they kind of don't want to get into it anymore. Right. Or maybe there was an NDA involved. But yeah, a lot of smoke in that area for sure. Yeah.
The NDAs are key. I remember there was one of the people that I had mentioned earlier that I was going to have on the podcast, Trapital. The interview timing didn't work out, but that was one of the first things they said. They were like, if you have any questions for us about Birdman and his relationship with this artist or anything like that, no, we're not answering it. And I was just like, all right, noted. And I feel like that's kind of ran true with a lot of this. But I think and Birdman and Slim specifically, in an odd way, it wasn't even just them alone. I feel like there was this ethos of, you could almost put Suge Knight into this same category as well, but these people that were cutthroat with the business folks that they were doing major deals with, whether it was Suge Knight with the folks at Interscope or Birdman with Universal, of like, hey, I'm going to take what's mine. And rightfully so, they kept ownership over what worked for them, and they did that. But they kept that same energy with a lot of the people that worked with them on the other side too. And that's the piece of it that, while it was frustrating to see, there is actually some other sides to this too, because even the fact that, I think we can get into it in a little bit, but just some of the artists they were able to sign, how they went about that, as frustrating as it was about them not paying artists, there were, not every aspect of the business was and is predatory. So that's one thing that, started to come up more and more, as once you get past the salacious parts of the details and stuff, you're like, okay, no. And no different than why you went down there to report them, right? There is nuance and there are a number of things to dive into.
For sure.
So shifting here, one of the other things that I've thought about, we talked a little bit about what set Cash Money apart. We talked a bunch about the backstory and the bad rap, but the next thing up here is about Cash Money itself and whether or not you think that it succeeded because of Birdman and Slim, or it succeeded despite them. So thinking about this hypothetical world, if it even is possible, of other folks that would have had this label in their hands and what things would have looked like. What's your take there if we're really isolating them as business leaders?
I absolutely think it succeeded because of them. I mean, did they get in their own way some of the time? Absolutely. But I think, anybody who can run a business that goes from the early 90s in an informal economy, in the Louisiana area, to being this global thing, to this day that is still, very much at the forefront of an industry. I mean, that they got to be doing something right, 30 plus years of staying relevant. And, from the early days of Hot Boys to the late 90s and, remember Big Timers and Still Fly and all that, to I think the heyday, as we were alluding to, in sort of the late aughts and early, 2010s, of Cash Money, Young Money with Nicki and Drake and Wayne, even coming through to say Scorpion. I mean, that's a really long run of relevance, and to have that. I mean, yeah, like I said, they got to be doing something right.
Yeah, I think it's because of them too. I will, because as much as there are issues, and we've talked about a lot of them here, there's so much of this that wouldn't have succeeded with other folks in charge, because there are a lot of record labels from the South that tried to do what Cash Money did as well. And a lot of them came and then most of them went. And the fact that we're having this conversation and not having it about them is part of it. And a lot of those record labels had talented people as well, but things just didn't carry over. They may have taken, a bigger deal to get more money up front, but then the hypothetical is, let's say it was in the hands of someone else that wouldn't have been able to push it forward. Then it becomes part of the island Def Jam conglomerate and then just kind of gets mixed. And then it becomes one of the many labels that you hear about where it's like, oh yeah, whatever happened to this one or that one. And I think it took what could have easily, because there would have been enough meat on the bone if we just talked about Cash Money from the early 90s up until, let's say, the mid 2000s, right? And I think that's a inflection point that we can talk about in a little bit. Even that itself was a great run itself. And then you look at the second half of the career from like the mid 2000s on, that's a whole nother historic record label. They have two of those under the same house. I think it's because of them. And as much as it can be frustrating to hear and see, and, and likely there's some critical things, but let's jump into that now though. Because I think one of the questions you have here is the biggest signing that this record label has had. What do you think is the biggest signing for Cash Money?
Oh man, I think probably easy answer is Drake, but I would actually say Lil Wayne, because if you don't have Wayne, I don't think the Drake thing happens. And really Lil Wayne from such a young age, going all the way back to the Hot Boys and coming through. I mean, all those Carter albums, they're like, he's the backbone of this whole operation, musically, sonically. And I think without him, you don't get everything else that comes along. What do you think?
Yeah, it's Wayne too. That's who I have. Yeah. I know that Drake is the highest commercial artist if you were to look at all of the numbers. And I think without him, the past decade would have looked very different. But we would still be having this conversation in some form, likely, if it wasn't for the past decade of Drake. It may be a bit more truncated, but we may not be having this conversation at all if it wasn't for Wayne. So I think it has to be Wayne there. What do you think is the best business move for Cash Money?
I'm going to go back to that first deal that they struck with Universal. It was in the early 90s, and Wendy Day, who we mentioned earlier, was sort of like a go-between who helped, really get them, kind of set up properly with this deal. But they negotiated it and they just, they wouldn't take anything less than something that they felt was an incredible deal. And I remember the story that Slim told me, was they went in, they sat down, some mid-level executive at Universal lowballed them to straight up buy half the company. And so he and Birdman just got up to leave. Then Doug Morris walks in, and he was the head of Universal at the time. Comes in with another colleague, Mel Lewinter. And Slim remembers, Doug saying, hey, if I were you, I wouldn't sell my company either. He comes in and offers him $30 million advance just for the privilege of doing business. And what does Universal get? A 7% distribution fee, which is not a lot. So it kind of almost doesn't make sense from Universal's perspective, unless you think about it in terms of market share. Market share is so important when you're the biggest record label, because there are all these great things that happen when you have the most market share. There are all kinds of rights that are assigned based on market share. Like anytime there's a mislabeled song that gets played or gets spun, and this happens a lot. The metadata in music is a disaster. So there are these huge pots of sort of like unresolved money, and what they eventually do is they get resolved down by market share. And so if you're Universal, you get the lion's share of that. And there's a lot of other things, a lot of other places where calculations are done based on market share. You can also brag, say that you're the biggest, stuff like that. So, certainly it was worth it for Universal to come in and especially, you think about at the time, hip hop was still in a nascent stage, and particularly hip hop in the South was like not even really on the map. for Universal to be able to come in and have this connection was really great for them. But yeah, I mean, what a great deal! $30 million. You don't have to give up anything. You just give a distribution fee. And frankly, you would want your stuff to be distributed by this enormous record label anyway, so that you could expand and get bigger and better. So I think hands down, that's it. That didn't stop. And there are rumors, that they were even bootlegging their own music, like out the back of of wherever, so that they didn't have to pay the 7%. But I don't know. I mean, that's that talk about efficient business. But yeah, I think you go back to that deal that kind of laid the groundwork, because if they had given up half of their company way back then, I mean, you see what happened. Jay-Z gave up, a huge chunk of Rockefeller early on, and I think was just never really that incentivized, to make that his main thing anymore, because, he'd given up such a big chunk early on. So,
yeah, it's one of the best deals we've seen in music and one of the best deals we've seen in hip hop over the past 30 years, without question. And the fact that they were able to get everything you mentioned, plus $2 million advance for 3 years. They kept ownership of the masters too. And that's the thing that, as we talked about, Birdman and Slim are still collecting on that year after year. So it's up there. It's incredible. And I know that there were other labels that tried to do the same, but just couldn't. And I think part of the reason is that this goes back into them focusing on what works for them. They had a unique sound. Universal saw this as their entryway to the South in an authentic way, because back then, the South was still vying for dominance. And I know that, things were happening at LaFace, but this was different. The New Orleans sound was different from what was happening in Atlanta at the moment. And this gave you entry path into that. So it was big time.
Yeah. And I think, also $30 million back then, I mean, probably more like $50-60 million when you talk about inflation. But, I would get to our earlier point, did Cash Money succeed, because of or despite Slim and Birdman? That's a situation where, obviously I wasn't there and there wasn't a video of it, but, when you sit down with Slim and Birdman, like you get the sense that it would be tough to negotiate with them. I mean, Slim's sitting there, he's like 10 feet tall. He doesn't really talk very much, and Birdman, he can get pretty loquacious, but like, he, when he wants to, be kind of stone faced, I mean, he can have a great poker face. So, I think, if you're some executive, you're going in and you're trying to get them to sell, and they have really no incentive to sell, and they're sitting there, just like, nope, we're good. I think that leads to you to offer them, some crazy deal like the one that Universal offered. And so I really would chalk that up to some very good negotiating on their part as well.
Yeah, you need to be able to negotiate to pull off hip hop's Louisiana Purchase. You got to at least one half.
Absolutely,
of it. At least one half of it.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I did have was a dark horse move, and a move that doesn't get talked about as much. And as much as that move does get focused on, the one dark horse that I did have is well, I guess two, but let me focus on this one. I would say that the mixtape strategy that they had with Lil Wayne in the mid to late 2000s, even though Cash Money had ownership of the music, even though I think that worked so well, because one of the questions that we have is just how well did this company or record label transition from different stages of music, whether it was from the CD era to ringtones or ringtones to streaming. And Cash Money knocked it out of the park with each of these. Their albums sold, especially when they did this deal at the height of the CD era, when the music industry was struggling in the mid 2000s and they were trying to get people to buy CDs. They were just like, hey, let's give away the music for free. And Wayne was rapping over other beats. He was in his bag more than anyone. And from Dedications to Drought, all of those, just so many classics in there that I think real hip hop fans and folks that were following Wayne were following even more so than the next album. So that all of that speaks to Lil Wayne being able to sell over 1 million albums in the first week when the Carter 3 drops in 2008, which is still a very tough time for CD sales to even happen. So that whole run and just the thought to do that. And granted, I think some of this may have been a bit more on Lil Wayne's push himself, especially because at that point he had his own Young Money imprint, but all of this is happening. And if Birdman and Slim had a problem with it, they could have said no. But I think the fact that they leaned into the change that was happening, you already saw what 50 Cent did with his mixtapes in the mid 2000s. You get Drama, you get the other folks in the South to be able to help make this happen. And I think it worked out well for them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point too. So, I guess when you have a label that has been that successful that long, yeah, there should be a couple different options for what the best move was. So
yeah,
I like that as a sleeper pick. Yeah.
And Lollipop is the best-selling ringtone of all time, too. Over 5 million ringtones sold. And, ringtones were selling for like $3 each at that point. So, $15 million just from folks wanting to, have, that little jingle on their Motorola Razors or whatever the hell people were using at that point. But what was your dark horse?
Oh, man, that's a really good question. I don't know. I guess it was just so clearly the Universal deal to me, but, and Drake wouldn't really be considered a dark horse candidate. I guess you could say as time went on, some of the subsequent deals that they worked out with Universal, maybe some of the deals where they were able to get Universal to tackle some of the back office stuff. It's like very unsexy, but that's clearly an area where they needed to improve. So to give up some more of your, let's say, to give up part of your dispute, to give us some cash in terms of like a higher distribution fee in order to have Universal, cover some of this stuff. It's kind of like a boring dark horse candidate, but you could say that's probably useful in terms of buttoning things up. And there was a lot of smoke, like we said, but nothing ever, like the house never burned down. So maybe those kinds of arrangements really kind of help prevent something like that from happening.
And I think that back office piece also just makes me think about the broader partnership and the expertise that they were able to lean on. And a question that I actually didn't explore, but now I'm thinking more about it, is how different do we think that the Universal partnership would have been, let's say, Cash Money had partnered with another label under the Universal umbrella? Because obviously part of this is very close. There was Universal Republic at the time, and they've been hand in hand working with Monte and Avery Littman ever since. And they are two of the most highly regarded executives in the game that have now been year after year after year the label with the #1 market share. And part of that is because of Cash Money itself, but it's also because of all the other stars, even outside of that label, they've been able to bring to, as opposed to many of the other labels in the Universal umbrella, or the umbrella of Universal Music Group labels that have not had that consistency. So I also think there's a dynamic there where, let's say there's another world where Cash Money was under Trapital, or Cash Money was under some of these other labels that have struggled to stay relevant, what that would have looked like.
Yeah, I think if you kind of, to go back to Def Jam, some of the back and forth that Def Jam has had over the years, it gives you an idea of even as like a top label, the kind of trials and tribulations you might go under. But when you're coming in, going directly to Doug Morris, that gives you a lot of leeway, a lot of leverage. You got that line straight to the top. And, even with somebody like Jay, it wasn't until, I don't know, with the late aughts when he was dealing directly with Doug Morris, when Doug, was over, what was this? He was, this is, I think, around the time of Blueprint 3. And Jay had that line, "I gave Doug a grip, I lost the flip for 5 stacks." There was something about he could have the album. They bet $10 million or $5 million on a coin flip, and one way or the other. So, but Birdman and Slim were doing that 15 years earlier, having that kind of direct line. So, again, I think going straight to the top served them incredibly well.
Definitely. Yeah. Another piece too. So two other, like technically three other dark horse candidates I'll bring up, but they're all under the same thing, was Birdman's ability to win bid wars and win huge bidding wars, I think is an underrated piece of this record label. So I'll bring up three of them. First one, go back to 2004. So this is around the time that The Carter came out, and Wayne was considering to leave Def Jam, and this was around the time that Jay-Z had just became president, and Jay-Z pushed hard to make that happen. And
gonna leave Cash Money for Def Jam. That was the thought, right?
Yeah.
Carter boys, and there are all these, kind of.
They're trying to push the whole Carter boy thing. And Birdman was like, all right, come through. I'll give you your own imprint, and you are the president of that imprint, and let's continue this thing. And that obviously sets up Young Money and then the next 15 years after that, right? So he does that, and I think that's huge, because then that sets the stage for the bidding war for Drake, because Drake drops So Far Gone beginning of 2009, and this is like, everyone is trying to, it's like the Wembayamba sweepstakes we're seeing in the NBA right now. Everyone wants this person, and everyone was going after them. I mean, Julie Greenwald, Lior, everyone was trying to get him, and it was that connection that Drake had with Cortez Bryan and Jay Prince, Jazz Prince, and that whole crew that I think eventually helped keep him on the Cash Money roster there. So that was a huge one. And I think we saw something similar with Nicki Minaj as well a couple months later. Everyone wanted her. Beam Me Up, Scotty. The mixtapes were hot. And Wayne was like, no, I want her to be the first lady of the label. That was the whole thing in the 2000s, right? Everyone wanted to have the first lady. You saw it in the 90s, right? But everyone wanted to declare and elevate this person, and rightfully so. But that's who we had. And then we obviously saw the beginning and the middle part of that next decade just go on one of the all-time runs. So Birdman's ability to win against the biggest people in the industry for a record label that him and, his brother own is really impressive.
For sure. And, it served Lil Wayne well in the end, because Young Money became something that he was able to sell for, about $100 million for his stake later on too. So, keeping that ownership as opposed to just chasing the biggest advance, time and time again, we see in hip hop, it's so important. But, I was thinking the other night, it's funny, I rewatched New Jack City, and it had been ages. And it reminded me, how much of the whole Young Money, Cash Money situation is modeled after elements of that movie. Even just the name Cash Money or CMB, YMCMB, the shirts, the shirts are incredibly similar. A lot of the lines, even the Carter, the albums are named. The Carter was the building, where Wesley Snipes' character was running this whole operation out of. So, that's kind of another interesting element to the whole, to the whole narrative. These guys coming out of Louisiana, had their eyes on this very New York kind of, almost role model for a business. And, they had been hustlers. They were kind of modeling themselves after these, fictional hustlers in New York. And then in a way, out hustled sort of the New York record label establishment. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, little side bit of color to the whole story. And a bit of irony as well, when you talk about the South versus New York kind of situation too.
And I think that also speaks to some of that mentality too, because here you have Birdman that was getting inspiration from a black crime movie. And I think a lot of the ways of him doing business is very much central on, okay, I want to support and uplift the black community, do what I can here. And granted, I think, part of how he was able to do that is, been quite controversial just with certain artists he's had on. Yeah. But still, I think that ethos stems back from ownership and trying to keep things in-house as much as you can. And it took them a lot to even partner with other artists from other parts of the countries and stuff like that I think you saw with Nino Brown and how he was in that movie and how he carried himself versus, I think, someone like Jay-Z, who record label Rockefeller, named after one of the great white business magnates that you had in this country. Right. And so many Jay-Z bars, whether it's Black Axl Rose, Black Kurt Cobain, Call Me This. I feel like, people always get on Kanye for some of that, like always trying to like be, okay, I'm, the black version of whatever X person. But I think Jay-Z, also had a lot of that too. And then I think also looking at his business mentality, a lot of his success came from his huge and lucrative partnerships with established companies in this space. So the inspiration, I think, also became kind of a telltale sign for the type of businesses these types of folks ended up creating too.
Yeah, and Brown was a really ruthless character, and I think part of there's like the money and the success that's glamorized, but it's a gritty movie. I mean, he is not a likable guy in the end. Without giving too much of the plot, I'm sure everybody's seen it, but like I was like, wow, yeah. I don't know if I'd be wanting to like model myself after this dude. He's like. He's pretty brutal, but even on the kind of the lighter side, there's a scene where he's like giving out turkeys at Thanksgiving.
Yep.
And the Cash Money guys always give out turkeys in New Orleans at Thanksgiving, and I wonder if they got that directly from the movie. Because so many from the Carter to the CMB kind of like whole ethos there. I wonder how much of that they just pulled directly from the movie. So,
oh yeah, I could definitely see that mentality too. And speaking about it, full circle, I could also see Birdman having a bit of that cancel that bitch mentality too in certain situations, right?
Right, exactly. So, yeah, they won't talk about that part of it in the interviews, maybe, but that you kind of get the sense of like that's where the negotiation and the cash element of the Cash Money comes in.
Yeah, Nino literally held people over the balcony of a building to get what he wanted, right? Yeah. A lot of that came through to fruition. But next category up here. So missed opportunity. Is there anything that you look at that you're like, man, obviously it's an overall successful company. Is there anything you look back on about, what if they did this differently? Or what if they did that differently?
I think the number one thing I wonder is what if they had sold the whole thing, a year and a half ago? Could they have gotten just an insane multiple? I mean, you're seeing like Springsteen, Sting, and all these guys getting hundreds of millions of dollars for their catalogs. So, I get it. And there's, catalogs, hip hop catalogs are valued differently from rock catalogs. And also one of the benefits of rock catalogs is they're usually, written and owned by, all the rights are with the band. There's not like a million different producers coming in. It's not as complicated. So like, they can sell the whole thing, 100% of the rights. And you don't have to, it's not like you're just buying like, I don't know, 30% of this and 50% of that and whatever. It's not this complex web. Let's say that there may not be as many things that haven't been papered over as there were with Cash Money, but man, there were some pretty insane numbers flying around, and I really wonder if they had been applying some 20 or 30x multiple to whatever they were pulling in, which is they can just sit there and make tens of millions of dollars a year just off of this catalog. I mean, so what would the market have been if they had went and sold the whole thing at the peak of the catalog boom? That's what I really wonder.
That's a good one. So I guess some high level back of the envelope math on that. So let's say that the peak of the catalog boom was like December 2020, maybe, and then like, into the spring of 2021. And we definitely saw some 30x multiples there. And at least the last public number I saw, and I think you had this in in one of your latest articles as well, but that Cash Money's masters generated around $30 million annually, or 20 to 30 million. Was that the number?
Yeah, I think it was at least 30. And, because Birdman, has been making like close to $20 million a year for a while, give or take. And, most of that is just, the catalog. So, yeah, I mean, that's just his cut. And then if you figure you double that for Slim, yeah, probably it was around 30, 35, something like that. So, yeah, I mean, are they going to get a 30x value even at the peak? I don't think so, because just hip hop wasn't getting that kind of valuation. I don't really understand that, because everybody's like, oh, rock and roll music going to stand the test of time? It's like, if you ask the average 20-year-old who Bruce Springsteen is, they're not going to know. I mean, it's so I would argue that hip hop is actually going to be more valuable down the line, but just that's not what people have been paying for. So even at the peak, I don't know that I saw any valuations anywhere near 30. I think Kanye was shopping his catalog at one point and wanted a 30x multiple, but didn't get any bites. So I think it comes down to like, what kind of multiple could they actually have gotten?
Yeah. Because even more recently, so we're recording this now, January 2023. There was a report that just came out about Dr. Dre selling a collection of music assets that I believe are worth different multiples. But the number that I heard from that was they generate around $10 million per year, and that he wanted 250 and he's getting just over 200 million or somewhere between that. So that's around a 20x multiple for a deal that sounds like it was still coming underway in 2022. So if you were to put that multiple on, let's call it $35 million for maybe what Birdman and Slim have collectively, then you're talking $700 million. So that's a pretty sizable number. Not a billion, but maybe if there are some concerns about maybe there's a bit more of a split of who owns what. We didn't even talk about publishing right now, but there may be a split too, especially if everything was captured there. And even thinking about quality control, for instance, and I think they got around 400 million. 300 got 400 million, but this was last year. So I would assume that 500 to 750 sounds, if I heard a number there, I would be like, sounds about right. If I heard a number lower than that or higher than that, I would probably be surprised one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense. And it's not just one artist. Obviously it's a whole bunch of artists and bunch of pieces of different artists. But I think another thing, and this is maybe one of the reasons why the hip hop valuations are lower, is like when you have all those producers, it might not be as easy to get clearances for using stuff in commercials and that sort of thing. Whereas if you buy 100% of the rights, there's no question.
Right.
And so I'm not even sure if somebody owned 1% of something, whatever, like, I don't think they would have some like veto right about the song being played in a commercial. But when you start to have so many different parties owning bigger stakes of a particular song, it can get a little convoluted. And, I do wonder if that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, because I think sampling also is a huge piece of that as well. The missed opportunity for me, this is a bit more of a specific one from like a time frame, not like a specific move, but Birdman and Lil Wayne not settling and squashing the beef and the issues that they had in the mid 2010s. I think we lost out on Wayne. I know Wayne was in prison during part of this, but we lost out on his momentum. We lost out on a lot there because I feel like a lot happened from the Carter 4 coming out in 2011 to the Carter 5 coming out in 2018, I believe. There was so much back and forth. There was so much drama. Drake was going on his all-time run at that point. Nicki was doing the same. And the fact that the signature biggest artist is literally tweeting out, I want off this label, but it's not that easy, or sending these messages out in the middle of Wayne and Drake having their tours and him still being on albums and trying to figure out how to drop things. I think it was obviously a great decade and run, but I think it could have been even greater if they were able to solve some of that stuff and figure it out.
Yeah, 100%. That was like, it's a long time to be going between proper albums, so and I think that was a really interesting time in the music business. And I mean, the music business changed completely, right? From 2011 to 2018, from being, this new streaming thing is going to be important, to like, it is the entire business basically. And I think that an artist like Wayne, is somebody whose music translates really well to that medium. And, as we know, hip hop is a monster on streaming and tends to do really well. So I would have been really curious to see if he had been able to continue that momentum, just how much bigger he could have gotten in that period of time too.
Yeah, definitely. The next piece we had too, I think we talked a little bit about this just in terms of how did the label handle the transitions. And I think you just mentioned it there. They were able to do a lot of it well, especially the mixtape piece and the ringtones. And then I think a lot of it laid the work for streaming, and Drake is the streaming king and did a lot of that on the Cash Money label. So I think that worked. But this next question is interesting though, because it's been around 3 years. I think it's been at least 3 years since you did your deep story, the Forbes cover story on Cash Money, where you went down and interviewed them. And then I know it's been 4 years since I had written a piece around the time that Drake had completed Scorpion, and we knew that it was going to be, or at least I thought the future may be bleak. And I think the question that you posed in the piece was, can they strike platinum again? It's been 3 years since now. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, it also the rules for platinum, like what constitutes platinum, have changed so much that all it takes is you get one hot signing and they do really well on streaming, and suddenly you have a platinum whatever. And it's like, okay, I think that right, Drake is gone, Wayne is gone. When I went down there, they were really big on Blueface and Jacquees. I don't know that either of them are turning out to be like, anywhere near Drake, Nicki, Wayne, etc.
Jacquees is the king of R&B, though.
Right. That was a whole thing too. So yeah, I'm gonna go with no. I don't think they will strike platinum again. But I would caveat that by saying it doesn't matter, because they can just sit back and collect these checks. And that's going to happen. That'll happen even if, Drake and Nicki and Wayne retire. I mean, their back catalog stuff is still going to be a gold mine. And, when I was down there, what they said was they're forever in business with Drake, but they wouldn't get more specific. And so what I took that to mean was, at the time, he was kind of extricating himself. But even once he's gone, they're still sitting on these, their share of the copyrights, and that will be, Drake is the streaming king, and they have a big piece of that. So, do I think they'll strike platinum again? Probably not, but I don't really think it matters. I don't think it's like, what are they going to do? Like, what are they going to do? They're going to sit back and collect those checks.
Yeah, I came to the same spot as well. I guess platinum in the purest sense of having a chart hit, sure, there could be some legacy hit that gets, some viral thing on TikTok, and then that becomes a hit. Like, I don't know if like Slow Motion, the single like Juvenile, went platinum, but I feel like that's the type of song I could see go viral in some TikTok thing and then brings new life to that. That's one of my favorite Cash Money songs. I feel like I could see something like that happening. Yeah. But I feel like you were kind of posing it more so in the moment of looking at these runs of like late 90s, early 2000s, that Cash Money is like a platinum moment, or mid 2000s, Wayne's mixtape run, late 2000s, early 2010 or to mid 2010s, Young Money rises to the highest of heights. I don't think we'll see that moment again. And it's crazy because I think there were times where maybe things could have happened. You had the Rich Gang moment where he looked like he was so close with Young Thug. And I feel like, especially in 2014, people expected Thug to go on to that superstar level, and he's still very successful. But I think that the stock for Thug at that moment was a little higher than it maybe actually reached. And I think some of Thug's proteges kind of reached the heights that we thought Thug would have reached at one point, just in terms of a commercial success perspective. But it just never quite happened. But again, they own this. It's not like they missed some opportunity. This is something that is literally generating tens of millions per year, and that's not changing anytime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's funny. They have, I guess, just to sort of like switch gears a tiny bit, but, this last moment when they said, when Birdman and Slim said they're forever in business with Drake, it wasn't in Miami, but I met with them for some follow-up questions in New York, and they have like within Universal's building in Midtown, they have a Cash Money conference room. Like there are actually these. I don't think it's diamond plated, but the door handles are giant dollar signs, like the Cash Money logo, and it looks like they're diamonds in the the dollar sign, and it's probably whatever it is, cubic zirconium or something. But you open up the thing and you go in, and there's like all these plaques on the wall, and it's just a conference room that's always there, and it's sort of like their designated conference room when they cut the tab. And I remember we sat down in that conference room, and I really tried to press them on the Drake thing. And I mean, if you dig up the Forbes story, we did a video too, and there's this great kind of like tense moment where I'm like really kind of pushing them about it, and they're like, "We're forever in business with Drake, and that's it." And it's clear that's all you're going to get out of them. But so in terms of striking platinum again, yeah, I mean, I could almost envision a scenario where Drake like does the Super Bowl and he plays some catalog hit that never went platinum, and just purely by the exposure of people hearing it, be like, "Oh man, I gotta listen to that again." It just suddenly goes platinum again, or for the first time. But yeah, short of that, I'm gonna agree with you. I think I think probably not again, but that it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah. So we have a couple questions left here. This one, and I think it's maybe similar to the points you're bringing up, but if you were in Birdman and Slim's shoes today, is there anything that you would be doing differently?
I think I go back to that question of like, would you sell the whole thing? Especially if the prospects are kind of dimming a bit. And, it's like, I don't know though. I mean, it's like if you're getting up there in age, like, would you sell, you got this great house that you bought, you got this great penthouse apartment in New York that you bought for like, $100,000 in 1982. And you could probably get, I don't know, 10 million bucks for it. And then you could just like rent and do whatever you want and, for the rest of your life, but like, you don't really need the money. Like you're fine as it is. Would you sell it? Like, what would you even do with the money that you got? Do you really love living in that apartment? Maybe you just stay. And I think that's kind of the point. Like, just remember being in the studio with Birdman, and he doesn't need to be doing this. Like, he doesn't need to be running around with Jacquees in Miami trying to make him the king of R&B or whatever. But he truly loves it. Like, you can tell that he's passionate about it. And after the interview was over, and I wish I had this on tape, but we're just like a dozen of us sitting there in the room, and Birdman, he goes, "Zach, why do people think I'm scary?" He's like, and I remember he said, it was like really poignant moment. He's like, I'm respectful, I'm not a clown. I don't turn tables over. I don't scream and yell. I'm respectful. Why are people so afraid of me? And I thought for a minute, and I said, I was like, look, man, to be honest, I think the face tattoos really are kind of like off-putting to some people who are not used to that sort of thing. And he was like, yeah, I've been thinking of getting them removed, he's like, I think it'd be better for business. So, it's like, there's still this element of, even though he's made it and he's got everything he wants, there's still this part of him, that came from a different world that, he's kind of like still stuck between two worlds, between the world that he came up in and the world that he can afford to live in. And, I think, where he feels, at his best is in the studio. So why would you sell that whole thing? Why would you, why would you kind of give that up? And I think Slim likes it too. And, they have this really funny relationship, and, Birdman's in the studio and Slim does the business. And that's kind of the breakdown of it. And I just remember like, after this interview, after leaving the studio, I went and we were all supposed to have dinner together. And I went off with Slim, and we waited for like a half an hour in the parking lot for Birdman, and he just never showed up. And then we went to dinner, and he just never showed up. And it's because he wanted to stay, and he stayed in the studio. He just stayed in the studio all freaking night because that's what he really loves. So, I guess it's a long way of saying, what would I do if I were them? I mean, probably like the financial advisor advice would be, sell this big thing. And then you're totally set for the rest of your life. But if it's throwing off more than enough money, tens of millions of dollars every year for you to live on, what's the point? Why not just do that and do what makes you happy?
I think that's a piece that often gets forgotten and understood with some of this stuff, is that some people really just love the craft. It makes me think too
Yeah.
about someone like Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg and these directors that are now in their 70s or 80s. They're not doing these movies to try to make more money. Well, granted, yes, I think they're bought into the financial success. They want fair terms, but this is what they enjoy to do. They've been doing it since they were kids, and they want to just find outlets to be able to do this at the best way possible. And I think the same could be said about Birdman, of wanting to be in the studio and just wanting to have that energy. And if you sell that, then what do you do? I think especially for someone like him that stuck to the thing that he does well, and like he isn't out here like Jay-Z trying to be a mogul in the sense of having different things. I mean, there's a mogul aspect in terms of the media ownership, but not in the sense of like, yes, I own this, I do that as well. Sure, maybe there's some smaller things that are in the, New Orleans or the Louisiana area, but not in that same way. So I do think that speaks a lot to that.
And I think they have dabbled in other stuff for sure, and real estate. And I think there was some period of time where they had like some oil rigs or something like that. They had a vodka called GTV. They were trying to really build up YMCMB as a clothing line type of thing rather than just merch. But none of that really kind of like ever went viral in the way that any of their artists did. So, and maybe because it was that they just didn't have the passion for it that they have for music, like that example of Birdman. So, Jay clearly has the passion for the business. He clearly has the passion for, doing the champagne thing or, doing the VC thing. And you can tell because he's out there doing it. He's doing it because he loves it. And he makes money. But I think it's hard for something to do well if you aren't truly passionate about it, because consumers can kind of see through that. And also, you're not going to go the extra mile for something if you don't truly care about it either.
Definitely. And mine is a little different, and this may be more so from a selfish perspective of what I would do, but that's part of the question, right? As someone that is such a fan of the vibe and the culture that they were able to create, I want to be able to relive that in different ways. I wish that Birdman and the team could patch things up and there could be a true Cash Money reunion tour that goes across the country. I know there's been different things here or there, but the same way that Diddy did the big Bad Boy Arena tour in 2016, I want to be able to see that. I'd love to be able to do that. And I also want to see a music biopic in the same style and the same budget and energy of Straight Outta Compton. I would love to see that about the Cash Money story. And to be honest, I feel like I know there's a lot of energy around these biopics, but like I may be biased because it's the genre I like. Since Straight Outta Compton came out, I just haven't seen one that's, as good as that. And sometimes it's been a bit frustrating when I see movies like Bohemian Rhapsody or Elvis, which I think are fine, but I don't think they were as good as Straight Outta Compton, and they're getting all these awards and stuff. And it makes me think that, okay, if there was, I don't know, whether it's get F. Gary Gray back again or someone that can, tell this story in a great way, I would love to see that unfold. But I think you would also need buy-in from the artist, because obviously the fact that the relationships are strained can make some of this tough, and the willingness to tell the story in a honest way, and the fact that there's kind of two sides to everything. Is Birdman going to be bought in if him and his brother are being shown as, like predatory loan sharks, like screwing people over?
Right.
Are the artists going to be happy if it's making it seem too favorable to Birdman? So I know there's some contentions with how the story is told, but it's still something I would love to see done in the right way.
Yeah, not to mention, how would you clear all the music? Is everybody?
Yeah.
How would you handle that? Although maybe now it's a little bit more streamlined, but again, like a lot of different cooks in the kitchen there, so you never know. But I'd love to see that too. Oh man, that would be a blast.
All right, so last question here. Who won? If there's one person, artist, executive from Cash Money, who would you say is the winner of everything that's happened over the past 30 plus years?
I think there's a lot of winners, a lot of losers, you get kind of little bit of both, but I'm gonna go with Slim. I mean, Slim has been in the background. Like, Birdman has gotten some more of the glory, but he's also taken a lot more of the heat. He's taken basically all the heat, I think. And Slim has managed to just sit back, run this like incredible business, and make just a boatload of money without taking some of the heat that his brother did. So I'm going to go with Slim. How about that? What do you think?
I like that answer. I'm glad you said that, because I think if we both said Birdman, it would have been like, yeah, Birdman. But Birdman is my answer. The bidding wars that he won over the years, the ruthlessness of just getting the deals done, staying true to what he knows. There's a lot that I disagree with, and there's a lot that I wish that he had done differently, and a bunch of missed opportunities, but they did something that we have not seen done in hip hop before. And we may not see that again just because of how things have changed and evolved over time. So it really is a credit to that happening. So yeah, I love the Slim take too, because the fact that he reaps the rewards without, any of the backlash. Like, I've never seen anyone tweet or get frustrated about like, oh yeah, Slim's really screwing these artists over, or Slim's really doing this. You know what I mean? It's always a photo of Birdman, But yeah, oh man, such a fascinating label. Before we close things out, any final thoughts on Cash Money Records?
Well, I would say also about Slim, there's this. Somebody had a great quote. It was some writer, and it was some famous writer, and they said, "A writer's fame is the best fame because you are not famous enough to get bothered on the street, but you are famous enough to get a good table at a good restaurant." And in a way, I think that's kind of what Slim was able to do. Like, he could get whatever he wants, he can have, but nobody's kind of bothering him about it. And I think that's how he wants it. And, Birdman, whatever he wants, he can have sort of, but what he can't do is walk outside without, everybody, harassing him, So, I think that, to some extent, he's more interested in the spotlight. You get the good with the bad. But, I think that spotlight, it's important, like, to be able to turn it off is a really great luxury to have, to turn it on and off. And, once it's on all the time, you'll never be able to turn it off. So I do a hat tip to Slim for that.
Yeah, for sure. And Slim also didn't get memes made out of him from telling Charlemagne off at the Breakfast Club either.
Or that too, yeah. Or the Birdman hand rub.
Yeah, the Birdman hand rub. Yeah. The Neuer clap, though. I mean, he did put on for that, though. But man, what a moment. Yeah. All right. Toast to Cash Money. And this is a fun one. What a fascinating case study. And yeah, we're gonna tell the stories that don't get told elsewhere. So, Zack, thank you for coming through. And thanks again for this Young Money, Cash Money t-shirt. For those folks watching on the videos, you can see this is the one last time I was in New York. Zack came through. He's like, I got something for you. And yeah, had to make it happen.
That's right. I should have worn mine today, but it was in the laundry, It was in the laundry.
Oh, yeah, definitely. All right, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks again.